She called 911 at 3 a.m. because I wouldn't release my garage for her little party. Nothing good starts with a doorbell ringing at 3 in the morning. Either you're being mugged, or someone died, or you have a neighbor with too much free time and not enough sense. In my case, it was the third option. I was asleep, deeply. One of those good quiet sleeps you only get once a week. The house was dark, the world was at peace, and my brain had finally switched off. But then, the doorbell came. Insistent, long, full of urgency. The kind that makes you stand up with your heart pounding in your neck. I went downstairs a little groggy, tripping over my slippers, thinking that maybe it was a real emergency. When I opened the door, I found a woman with a glass of wine in her hand, dressed in a pink satin robe, with an expression of drunken superiority that I hadn't seen since my aunt discovered that her mother-in-law served flatbread. The neighbor, the same one who keeps putting an anonymous note in my mailbox because she thinks my truck is too big for such a harmonious neighborhood. Before I could ask her what was going on, she got straight to the point, like someone asking to borrow sugar. "Can you move your truck from the front of the garage? My guests are arriving and have nowhere to park." 3 in the morning. I couldn't even reply straight away. My brain froze. It was as if she'd asked if I could borrow my CPF to open a company in her name. I had to take a deep breath to make sure I was really awake, and this wasn't a sleep deprivation hallucination. The woman stared at me as if it were the most natural thing in the world to borrow a neighbor's garage at dawn in order to shovel in the cars of people who don't even live on the street. She also used a "it's the least you can do as a member of the community" tone. I said, "No, of course." I didn't shout. I didn't even swear. I just said no, with a calm voice, a serene tone, and the look of someone who wanted to go back to bed more than deal with a circus on the sidewalk. She didn't understand, or pretended not to. First, she snorted. Then she tried to laugh it off, as if I was the odd one out. Finally, she tried the collective spirit of the neighborhood. Argument. The famous forced union card that is only used when it suits those who want to take advantage. I refused again, and I closed the door. The next part is worthy of a comedy script. 10 minutes later, with my face already sticking to the pillow, I hear a siren. A real siren. 911 police. Giroflex flashing in the street. I jumped up. I opened the window thinking an accident had happened. And there she was, standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, talking to 2 policemen, and pointing at my house as if she had just denounced a clandestine laboratory of banned substances. I went down again. I was already laughing, because the only thing I had left to do was laugh. When I opened the door, the policeman, polite but clearly tired, asked me if we could talk. She jumped in with the excitement of a child who has just fingered her brother. "He's blocking the garage. My guests have nowhere to park, and he's causing a disturbance." The policeman looked at her with an expression that mixed tiredness and shame. He looked at me. He looked at my truck, perfectly parked in my space, in front of my house. Everything was fine. All right, everything as common sense dictates. That abstract being that apparently never visited her mind. All I could say was, "Officer, that's my truck. That's my garage. That's my property." The policeman took a deep breath. His partner, next door, was already typing something into her cell phone, probably writing down the case to use as an example of abuse of the emergency system. They stood there for another 5 minutes. They lectured the woman on the misuse of 911, on false calls, on respect for private property. She tried to interrupt. She tried to claim community cooperation again, but it was too late. The shame had already set in. When the cops left, she gave me a look of contempt that was probably trying to be intimidating. But with her pink robe and wine glass trembling in her hand, it looked more like a deleted scene from a failed reality TV show. I went back to bed. But sleep after that? Only with a couple of tranquilizers and an angry prayer. What should have been a quiet night became a headline in the neighborhood group the next day. And the truck? It was still there, shining, triumphant, parked with the dignity that only private property has. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating. 3 messages in the neighborhood group, a missed call from the landlord, and a meme, a picture of a road sign that read, "Private property is not party parking," with the caption, "Good times," when that was obvious. I didn't need to ask where it came from. The news from the night before was already buzzing in the neighborhood. The woman had gotten what she wanted, attention, just not in the way she'd hoped. She thought she was going to come off as the victim of an insensitive neighbor, but she ended up becoming the protagonist of a nightly spectacle of despair. Everyone was commenting. Some laughed, others were shocked, and the more sensible were beginning to wonder how far she was willing to go for a parking space. She, of course, showed no shame. She left the house at around 10 a.m., with her face held high, sunglasses bigger than her ego, and a cup of coffee that looked more like a fashion show accessory. She walked as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't called 2 policemen because someone dared not lend their garage to their drunken guests. During the day, I noticed a different kind of movement on her sidewalk, people coming and going, boxes being carried, the sound of loud laughter. It was as if the party had continued, or restarted, as an act of protest. And of course, the cars returned. Only this time they were parked anywhere a wheel could fit. Lawns, street corners, the front of a fire hydrant. Everything became an impromptu party spot. The whole neighborhood became a social gambiara. Even the delivery boys were complaining about not being able to stop in front of the houses. One of them, poor guy, had to leave a package on my sidewalk because the entrance was blocked by an SUV with a license plate and with a handwritten sign on the windshield, HOA guest, do not mulct. The level of delirium was cinematic. I began to notice a strange movement at my own gate. Tickets. First, 1. If you could release the space after 8 p.m., we'd appreciate it. Support team. Support team. As if she had put together a tactical team to organize the chaos. Then another. We appreciate your understanding the night before. It was a difficult time for everyone. Administration of the get-together. Administration of the fraternization. Seriously, it felt like I'd been cast in a bad neighborhood comedy script. And the worst thing? She was loving it. She walked along the sidewalks greeting everyone as if she were on an election campaign. She smiled, waved, asked if the music was too loud, all with the air of someone who thinks they're doing humanity a favor by being who they are. Some of the neighbors started to get annoyed, discreetly, of course, because she was the type to make a fuss over a leaf out of place. But comments began to appear in the neighborhood group, questions about limits on street use, parking rules, and whether it was allowed to close the entrance to other people's houses with cardboard cones and private event ribbons. She answered everything, of course, as if she owned the truth and the sidewalk. She said that the get-together was a community tradition, that it had been verbally approved by the majority, a lie, and that she was just celebrating the unity of the neighborhood. That's when the liquidator finally spoke up, with that polite, threatening tone that only he can maintain. There was no official request to use the public highway. Undue calls to the emergency service will be documented. And we remind you that the garage of each house is for the exclusive use of the respective resident. The condominium administration does not endorse the appropriation of private property, even temporarily. The message came like a bucket of ice. But the woman? She was silent for half an hour. Then she reappeared in the group with a joke message. Too bad not everyone shares the same spirit of generosity. And a wine glass emoji. Some laughed. Others started to leave the group. That night, for the first time, my doorbell didn't ring. No cars invaded my sidewalk. No note was left. But I saw from the window that she was there, sitting with a glass in her hand, surrounded by a few people, looking in the direction of my house with that "it's not over yet" look on her face. And indeed, it wasn't over, because 9/11, which she thought she was going to use as an extension of her domestic authority, opened a protocol, misuse of service, false call, conduct report. What was just a garage stall turned into a real headache. 3 days passed, enough time for the dust to settle, or so most people thought, because for her, the whole thing had turned into a personal war. Except that what used to be done with performative arrogance and a glass of wine in hand had now turned into paranoia. The mood had changed. The woman seemed to have gone from an "I'm the queen of the neighborhood" vibe straight into an outburst of absolute control. She started walking down the street with a clipboard. Yes, a clipboard. She took notes. She wrote signs. She took photos. She analyzed parking times, the positioning of garbage, anything that could become ammunition. The neighborhood, previously just watching with debauchery, began to get uncomfortable. Some people crossed the street just so they wouldn't have to. Others began to cover the cameras with tape, thinking they were in an episode of Big Brother. However, the most embarrassing moment came at another HOA meeting. This time, in person. No one wanted to go, of course. But, after the unnecessary 911 call, the rumor that something serious was going to be dealt with caused the hall to fill up. And there she was, sitting in the front row, looking like she'd slept 3 hours a week, surrounded by papers, printed documents, and a countenance like she swore she was saving the world from the apocalypse of common sense. She asked to speak, and she was granted. After all, the rule was clear. Every resident had the right to speak for 5 minutes. She used 15. She said that the neighborhood was disintegrating morally, that solidarity had been replaced by hostility, that a certain resident, without naming names of course, had refused to collaborate with an integration event. He used words like collapse of collectivity, ethical bankruptcy of coexistence, and threat to the spirit of the neighborhood. All this without a shred of self-criticism. It was at this point that the liquidator stood up, snorted, and unleashed the first bare-handed slap. I would like to remind everyone that the use of the 911 emergency service is restricted to situations of immediate and real risk. Any attempt to manipulate the service for personal conflicts will be treated seriously, including referral to the prosecutor's office if necessary. The room fell silent, a silence that burned. Everyone understood the message, including her. She went home that day on mute. But the next day, what arrived was even better. An official notification from the town hall. Someone, probably 911 itself, had reported the case of the unsubstantiated call, and now she was under investigation for misuse of a public service. Nothing serious at first, but enough to make anyone rethink the value of a ringing doorbell at dawn. She didn't appear on the street for 2 days. Some say she was only seen through the window, eating yogurt and staring at the wall. Others claim that she called some neighbors to try to re-establish ties in a pathetic attempt to look like a victim. One of them, Mr. Ricardo from number 48, unfiltered, "If she calls here, I'll tell her that my garage now only accepts hybrid cars because of the negative energy, you know?" Meanwhile, my truck remained firmly parked in my garage, like an involuntary trophy. Some of the locals even started making jokes. One put a magnet on the car that read, "Private, no parties for the crazy woman in the pink robe." Another made an illustration of the police scene at 3 in the morning and pasted it on the HOA hall bulletin board with the caption, "Best call of 2025. But the best moment was when she tried to play her last card. She sent a letter, yes, a real letter, printed on fake letterhead from the Temporary Association for the Rescue of Good Coexistence, which no one has ever heard of. In the letter, she asked the neighbors to sign a document of rotational solidarity of vacancies. Basically, it wanted to create a garage rotation. On paper, of course, it sounded nice. In practice, it was her trying to ensure that, in any new bizarre event, she could once again park people on other people's doorsteps. Nobody signed it. The letter ended up in a neighborhood Facebook group and became a national joke. There was even a page that shared it with the caption, "When you have nothing to do and decide to become president out of the blue." Comments? Thousands. Reactions? Most laughing, some in shock, others asking if it was permissible to dig a bunker to escape such a neighbor. And at that point, she began to fade away. Not by choice, but because she lost her strength. She lost the fear she used to put in people. She lost respect, if she ever had any. The neighborhood took a deep breath. The street became lighter. And my garage? It was still there, untouchable, unshakable, a piece of asphalt and dignity that survived the storm of absurdity. After the fiasco of the letter with the fake letterhead, she disappeared for a few days. Not out of respect, but out of sheer shame. It was as if she had lost the plot, and rightly so. The woman began this saga as an ambassador of good coexistence and ended up as a digital joke, shared on WhatsApp groups of mothers, neighborhood pages, and even on a humor account that made an animated version of the 9/11 night with dubbed voices. The line in which she said, "My guests are out of room," became a catchphrase among the teenagers on the street. The invitations to her parties stopped. The house that used to be a noisy meeting place became a bubble of silence. The lights were off. The gate was locked. There were no cars for the guests. Everything indicated that the party was over. Literally. Some neighbors, out of custom or pity, still tried to talk to her during the first few days. She only replied with short sentences, an expression of someone who had eaten lemon peel and vinegar juice. The pink robe disappeared. The diva glasses gave way to a clean-shaven face. And the clipboard? It disappeared as if it had never existed. Even the landlord commented, in a tone that was more cynical than concerned, "Peace has returned, but I miss the entertainment." No one replied. All that was heard was a timid "Amen" from the back of the room. As she left, my life returned to normal. Or rather, it got better. The truck, that involuntary symbol of resistance, was treated with more respect than the president of the association himself. Children made faces at it, as if it were the neighborhood mascot. One neighbor even put lights around the bumper during Halloween. And believe me, no decoration has ever been so prominent on the street. The irony was confirmed when the condominium bulletin came out. There, in the space for recorded misconduct, it was misuse of the emergency service, unnecessary and unauthorized action. Penalty applied, official warning and entry in the HOA's internal register. That was the end of her era. She went from being the unelected sheriff of the street to the only person named in an official document for calling the police about a parking space. But the end still had a special flavor. A few weeks later, a new couple arrived at the end of the street. Young, lively, with 3 young children and a dog that barked as if it had a megaphone built into it. And their car? A truck even bigger than mine. White, shiny, with a horn that could wake up even a sleeping ant. The vehicle began to be parked in exactly the spot where it all began, in front of my garage. Only now, with my consent. And she just watched from the window. I knew there was nothing I could do. I'd used up all my cartridges. Any attempt to impose any kind of rule would be met with laughter, or worse, outright ignorance. What she was left with was exactly what she feared most: indifference. She was no longer listened to. She was no longer respected. She was no longer feared. And the most ironic thing? The neighborhood was more united now than ever. Because after so much nonsense, everyone learned that the real enemy of good coexistence isn't the truck, the lack of parking space, or the noise of the party. It's the person who turns a no into an emergency. The person who thinks that living near someone is the same as having the right to use everything they own. Today, the street is peaceful. Parties take place. Cars park where they can. And if they can't, that's fine. No one tries to confiscate someone else's garage on the basis of delusions of authority. And the woman? She's still there, a shadow of her former self. She watches the movement from the window. And maybe, just maybe, she's learned that an inflated ego doesn't fit on a narrow sidewalk. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.